In 2017, I used to reside in a compact apartment in Denmark known as a study apartment. These apartments are typically small, one-room accommodations designed for young individuals who wish to move out despite having limited finances. Although there was usually a lengthy waiting period to secure such apartments, I was fortunate to be approved shortly after joining the waitlist. The process happened rapidly, and before I knew it, I had a place to call my own. The apartment was situated in a somewhat questionable neighborhood, predominantly occupied by low-income families reliant on welfare and individuals with special needs placed there by the government. Despite this, it didn't bother me much. Having my own place at a relatively young age felt like a significant achievement. I could spend time with my friends, invite my girlfriend over, and revel in the sense of adulthood. During my stay, nothing particularly eerie occurred, except for occasional encounters with an elderly woman who suffered from mental illness. She would frequently scream and curse at other residents. Her behavior was unsettling, causing me to remain cautious whenever I entered the parking lot. I discovered that she refused to pay her electric bill due to a belief that the government was monitoring her. Additionally, she always wore a bicycle helmet, convinced that aliens were attempting to seize control of her mind. I learned about all of this from a friend whose girlfriend worked with elderly citizens. Despite the presence of this woman, I never truly felt unsafe in the apartment complex. I remained aware of my surroundings and ensured my doors were always locked. Before going to bed, I would inspect my apartment, just in case the old lady was lurking somewhere, mistakenly assuming I was an intruder. However, one night, after a late-night gaming session that ended around 3 a.m., I had just settled into bed and switched off the lights. As I was on the brink of sleep, the doorbell suddenly rang, startling me so much that I nearly jumped out of bed. I sat up, straining my ears to listen in the eerie silence that followed. It was 3 a.m., and I wasn't expecting any visitors. My front door had a wooden frame with slot windows at the top and bottom, which I covered with paper to prevent anyone from peering inside. Despite the paper blocking the view, the hallway light still cast a silhouette of someone standing outside my front door. This sight alarmed me as I cautiously approached. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, trying to sound composed. "Please, let me in. I need your help," came a slurred voice, sounding intoxicated but feigned. "What do you want? Who are you?" I responded, feeling apprehensive. "Please, help me. I need your help. Just let me inside." The voice persisted. "No way, man. I don't even know who you are. Do you have any idea what time it is?" I replied firmly, growing increasingly wary. "Just let me in. I swear I'm not going to hurt you," the voice pleaded. Hearing this only heightened the creepiness of the situation. To prepare myself, I grabbed my golf club from behind the door. "Listen, I don't know what you need help with, but you better speak up or I'm coming out there, and you won't like what happens," I warned, gripping the doorknob tightly. "I'm looking for number 86. Please, just let me in," the man insisted. "You're at 64. You're on the wrong level." "Is that what you needed help with?" I clarified. The man started pounding on my door vigorously. Ready for a confrontation, I held the doorknob, bracing myself. Suddenly, the pounding ceased, and I heard the man's phone vibrating. "Hello." "Okay," he said, addressing me with newfound confidence. He then retraced his steps down the hallway and left. Initially in combat mode, I now felt confused and somewhat unnerved by the entire encounter. I couldn't fathom why someone would send a hitman after me. I didn't have any enemies. It was possible that the man had simply arrived at the wrong place, or perhaps he was a disturbed individual seeking to toy with people in the middle of the night. Following this incident, I stayed up for another hour, smoking cigarettes and keeping watch in case he returned. However, he never did. To this day, I remain clueless about what the person wanted. The sudden shift from a fake drunken voice to complete sobriety suggests that this wasn't a typical situation. Furthermore, who knocks on a stranger's door at 3 a.m. with all the lights off? The man's remark about not intending to harm me added to the unsettling nature of the encounter. If I had opened that door, something terrible might have happened. I'm relieved I made the decision to keep it shut. This entire ordeal had an air of shadiness, and I'm glad to report that nothing else of that sort occurred. 2 years later, I eventually moved away from that place. A few weeks ago, I had to take a flight to an unfamiliar small town in order to find a place to live before starting grad school in the fall. My boyfriend accompanied me on the trip. Prior to our departure, I extensively researched apartments on Craigslist and arranged several appointments. Our first appointment was scheduled for the afternoon in a remote residential area. The landlord seemed fine in our email correspondence and requested that I call him an hour before the appointment to confirm my arrival. However, when I made the call, he didn't answer. Undeterred, my boyfriend and I decided to walk to the house, hoping that the landlord would show up. Roughly 10 minutes before the scheduled appointment, the landlord called me. He sounded like an older man and spoke in an oddly slow manner, but I dismissed it as age-related. I confirmed that we were in front of the house, and that's when things took a strange turn. The landlord became extremely upset and questioned why I hadn't mentioned having a boyfriend. It never occurred to me to disclose this information, since my boyfriend wasn't planning to move with me. He was simply helping me search for apartments. After explaining this to the man, he paused for a long time before apologizing, citing instances when people didn't inform him about being married, which surprised him. He then abruptly ended the call, leaving us perplexed. I shared the conversation with my boyfriend, and he immediately felt uneasy. He wanted to leave, but considering the limited housing options available, we reluctantly decided to stay just in case this was the right place for us. As we debated what to do, we noticed a man leaving the house we were supposed to view. He appeared young and extremely suspicious, taking one look at us before hastily driving away. Although this incident further creeped us out, it wasn't enough for us to bail just yet. My boyfriend and I exchanged concerned glances, unsure of our next move. Eventually, the landlord arrived. He appeared to be in his 50s, towering and physically imposing. His eyes were devoid of emotion and seemed vacant. Slowly approaching us, he mentioned that he would shake our hands, but they were dirty from work. My boyfriend inquired about his job, and the landlord curtly replied. From that point on, he directed all his questions exclusively at me, disregarding my boyfriend. Throughout the conversation, his gaze fixed unblinkingly on my eyes. I tried to provide evasive answers, while my boyfriend posed similar questions to the landlord, who outright refused to respond. Then, out of nowhere, the man suggested showing us the basement. We should have left at that moment, but for some foolish reason, we stayed. I kept convincing myself that this was just an eccentric old man from a small town, and his behavior was a manifestation of paranoia. On the other hand, my boyfriend wanted to escape this increasingly uncomfortable situation. Reluctantly, he followed us as the man led us toward a detached shed at the back of the house, away from the street. Upon opening the shed's door, we were greeted by a set of stairs descending into complete darkness. The man fumbled with the switch, but the light failed to illuminate the space. Normally, one would exclaim something like, "Oh, the light's out," but the man remained eerily calm. He walked slowly into the darkness and stood there motionless. Then, he casually asked if we were coming down. My boyfriend retorted that there was nothing to see in the absence of light. The landlord stood there for a prolonged period before finally ascending the stairs, wordlessly closing the basement door behind him. He then proceeded to take us inside the house, and that's when things became increasingly bizarre and unsettling. The front door, our only means of exit, locked automatically. When my boyfriend attempted to tamper with it, the man grew visibly agitated and demanded that he leave it alone. Nonetheless, my boyfriend managed to discreetly unlock it. Throughout our tour, the man continually tried to corner us in small rooms, often reaching into his pockets before retracting his hands when he caught us observing him. Both online and during our in-person meeting, The landlord claimed that a grad student already resided in the house. However, the evidence seemed staged. There were neatly stacked, generic textbooks on the table, but not the kind a person in their 20s would typically read. A bowl of fruit sat on the table, yet the fridge, pantry, and utensil drawers were completely empty. The closet contained a mere 3 t-shirts, and the landlord couldn't provide any information about the school he attended or how long he had been renting the house. Finally, he guided us through every room except one, stating that it was merely the attic and there was no need for us to see it. When we pressed for answers, he presented various excuses, including it being unfinished, containing furniture, or emitting a foul odor. The last reason seemed plausible since a terrible stench emanated from the area near the door. After enduring the increasingly uncomfortable encounter, we finally found an opportunity to make our excuses and escape. The man escorted us out, promptly returning to his car. However, when he believed we had turned the corner, he got out of his car and slowly sauntered back into the house. My boyfriend, fixated on the suspicion that something was amiss, decided to Google the landlord that night. We discovered 3 unsettling facts. He was a well-known figure in the community. There was no evidence of him owning or managing any real estate as advertised on Craigslist, and he had listed his home address as the same house we had toured. Needless to say, it was the creepiest experience of my life. This incident occurred when I was around 14 or 15 years old at my parents' house. Although I am now 25, reminiscing about it still gives me goosebumps. It was towards the end of my summer break, and my parents decided to go on one final fishing trip before school started. My mom ran a cafe in front of the high school. Before leaving, they gave me the usual instructions on how to reach them and other mundane details. They took my dad's Jeep since my mom's car was at the repair shop. Consequently, going out was out of the question for me. With the house devoid of adults and a fully stocked bar, my dad was quite the drinker. I embraced the opportunity to stay home alone for the entire weekend. I indulged in junk food, binged on B-horror films rented from Netflix. This was during the mail-order DVD era, and made myself comfortable downstairs on my dad's leather recliner. It was Saturday night, or technically Sunday morning, as I sat there with a bowl of popcorn in hand, eyes fixated on the television while watching Ring You. I had turned off all the lights to immerse myself in the eerie atmosphere of the horror movie. Sometime during the movie, nature called, and I needed to use the bathroom. Being lazy, I didn't bother turning on the lights as I walked to the bathroom near the front door. While pondering the plot of Ring You on the toilet, I happened to glance up at the oval window facing the front yard. Instead of curtains, my dad had used frosted privacy film, which prevented people from seeing inside but allowed for vague shapes to be discerned. Lost in my thoughts, I noticed something peculiar, a figure outside the window that resembled a person standing there. What made this sight odd was that our front porch lights were switched off, and there was only a shadow due to the streetlight in front of our house. As my mind processed this, the shadow moved out of view. It was precisely at that moment that I realized whoever was out there had managed to bypass the motion-sensitive lights without triggering them. The only way to avoid setting off those lights was to go around the side of the house and crawl over the banister. With this realization, I also noticed that the person was now standing outside our front door. Reacting awkwardly, I slid off the toilet, pulled up my pants, and adopted a military-style crawl to the living room. My primary objective was to frighten the intruder, who seemed to have mastered the art of eluding the porch lights. Moreover, since there were no cars in the driveway, neither my dad's Jeep nor my mom's car, they'd probably assumed nobody was home. I lay on the floor, straining my ears for any sounds of movement, when I suddenly heard footsteps pacing. Fear gripped me as I worried that this person might break in and discover a defenseless young girl alone in the house. In a state of panic, I crawled to the kitchen, grabbed a phone, and as I did so, the footsteps outside ceased as if someone had left the porch. I turned to look at the front door and noticed that the lights had not turned on, indicating that the person had jumped off the side. My eyes then fell upon a window with raised blinds near the back door. We kept those blinds up due to our two mischievous cats, who would otherwise ruin them in their quest to see outside. Rushing to the window, I closed the blinds and sat on the floor. I had no clue if the person had seen me, but considering their familiarity with the porch lights, they would know that the blinds were perpetually raised. The glow from the TV prevented me from spotting anyone when I rushed over, but this only amplified my terror. I sat there for a while, straining my ears for any signs of movement outside. However, there was nothing until I heard the porch door shaking. My dad had attached a hook to the door so we could let the cats out without them escaping, but my mom often forgot to secure it properly. The reason I heard the door shaking was that I had locked it the last time I was outside. Now in a state of complete panic, 3 thoughts raced through my mind. First, this person knew how to navigate past the porch lights. Second, they were aware of the uncovered window that I had hastily covered. Third, they knew that the porch door was typically unlocked 99.9% of the time. While a sensible person would have called the police at this point, I instead called my dad. The phone rang as I ensured that the back door, the garage door, and the front door were all locked. It took a while, but my dad eventually answered the phone, sounding half annoyed and half concerned. I told him not to freak out, but that I was freaking out myself. I explained the situation and questioned why he hadn't called the police yet. I was in my parents' room at this point, and I turned on all the lights, hoping that the illuminated bedroom would create the illusion that an adult was present. My dad instructed me to hang up and call the police while he contacted the neighbors. Before dialing the police, I frantically ran around the house like a mad person, turning on every available light. When the police arrived, they found no one. In fact, I was so afraid to open the door for the cop who knocked that I demanded he show me some form of identification. He presented his badge, and I even called the police station to verify his identity. The neighbors reassured my parents that I was safe, but they hadn't found anyone lurking around the house. Consequently, my parents immediately drove back home. From that point on, they never left me alone until they returned. The following week, I couldn't shake off the horror of being home alone. I refused to open the blinds for the cats or use the downstairs bathroom. Additionally, since we had woods in our backyard, I was terrified that the intruder might be lurking there. The scariest part was that at the end of that week, a woman's house was burglarized, and she was assaulted. Her husband was away on a business trip, and the perpetrator had entered her house through the back door. The thought of what could have happened if I had been asleep or if the intruder had realized a teenage girl was home alone chilled me to the bone. Last summer, an incident unfolded during a trip to Bournemouth with my brother, his girlfriend, and a few of her friends. Bournemouth, a picturesque seaside town on England's south coast, served as a delightful holiday destination. However, when large crowds gather, the possibility of encountering shady individuals increases. As we strolled through the park together, my brother's girlfriend suggested heading to the shopping center with her friends. My brother, whom I'll refer to as John, and I weren't particularly interested, so we declined, planning to join them later. Feeling weary of the bustling crowd, John and I sought a moment of tranquility before reuniting with his girlfriend. We decided to find solace in a nearby forest, where we could enjoy some privacy. However, upon arrival, an unexpected wave of unease washed over me. Transitioning from a lively street to a secluded forest amplified my apprehension. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. Those shady characters I mentioned earlier might have been lurking here as well. In fact, it dawned on me that they could even call this place home. Despite my gut instinct urging caution, I foolishly dismissed the unease. John and I proceeded to search for a suitable spot to relax and smoke. However, I found it challenging to enjoy the experience fully, as the earlier sense of unease persisted, and to my dismay, grew stronger after we finished. Out of the corner of my eye, I suddenly caught sight of a figure moving among the trees, gradually approaching us. John also noticed it. As it drew nearer, we discerned a tall, emaciated man in his 40s, with long, greasy hair and missing teeth. Instantly, we realized he was a drug addict, a tweaker. He shouted in our direction, asking if we had seen any drugs nearby. John and I exchanged confused glances and replied, "No, sorry, we haven't seen any drugs here." The man then yelled something and swiftly headed in the opposite direction. "Well, that was strange. Just your average crackhead," John remarked with a hint of jest. However, I wasn't in a lighthearted mood. My paranoia heightened as I grasped the fact that we were not alone, pondering how many more individuals might be lurking in the vicinity. Moments later, our suspicions were confirmed when an older man, appearing to be in the throes of addiction, pedaled up to us on a bicycle. He mumbled through his remaining teeth, struggling to articulate his words. He asked if we were present for the big thing. John promptly replied, his voice steady and composed, "No, not this time." I sensed that my brother was experiencing the same level of tension as I was. The man on the bike shrugged and began to ride away, but abruptly halted, placing his foot on the ground. He turned around, fixing his gaze intently upon us, as though we were intruders in this space. While this unsettling encounter unfolded, I heard the sound of twigs snapping from various directions. I glanced over and witnessed more tweakers emerging from the forest, their torn clothing, bloodshot eyes, and unsteady gaits reminiscent of a horde of zombies. Without exchanging a word, John and I instinctively fled in the direction we came from. My heart pounded, and adrenaline surged through my veins. The ordeal felt like an eternity, although it likely lasted a mere 10 minutes. Eventually, we reached the entrance back to the park. Yet even that sight failed to assuage my fears, as I continued to hear the echoes of footsteps trailing behind us. Suddenly, John turned around and exclaimed, "Oh shit." I dropped my joint. He stepped a few paces behind me, frantically rummaging through the leaves, seemingly unhinged. "Just leave it. We need to get out of here before they catch up," I urged, attempting to restore a sense of calm. "Just give me a second, man." "Relax," he replied, crouching down and sifting through the foliage, his actions resembling those of a disturbed individual. An overwhelming terror gripped me as I gazed upward. Figures emerged from the tree line in the distance, and I could swear I heard them emitting enraged moans as they staggered toward us. "Forget the joint. I don't want to become their meal. Zombies, man. They're coming for us," I exclaimed, fully aware of the irrationality of my words. Yet at that moment, I genuinely believed we were being pursued by an undead horde. Nothing could convince me otherwise. Without waiting for a response, I seized John and pulled him to his feet. Miraculously, we'd managed to escape unscathed, with no bites or scratches from the tweaker zombies. They ceased their pursuit at the park entrance, gradually fading back into the woods. We remained in the park, eventually reuniting with John's girlfriend. We recounted the terrifying encounter, hoping for empathy and understanding. However, she found the story amusing. While we can now laugh about it, my brother and I still bear the emotional residue of that harrowing experience. I often pondered the intentions of those crackheads and questioned why they were present alongside us. My best guess is that we unwittingly stumbled into the midst of a significant drug deal. Perhaps the first man we encountered was the dealer, and our unintentional disruption made the tweaker zombies believe we were rival suppliers. Or maybe it was something entirely different. I'll leave it to the imagination of the readers. One thing remains certain. I will never again venture into unfamiliar territory, especially while under the influence. There is always a reason to exercise caution. I apologize in advance for not being the best storyteller, but I'll do my best to recount the events as I remember them. Back in high school, I used to date a guy named Norman. It's been around 12 to 13 years since then, and I'm 29 now with a 9-year-old daughter. We were each other's first love, wearing promise rings, which was a big deal back then. Like any teenage couple, we talked about marriage and our future together. Over time, we started arguing and falling into a cycle of breaking up and getting back together. Immaturity got the best of me, and during one of our breakups, I ended up getting involved with another guy. It turned into a messy love triangle, leading Norman and me to part ways for good when I chose the other guy. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I was 17 and lacked insight. A few years later, I made a Facebook account and decided to look up Norman out of curiosity. We connected on Facebook, and I messaged him to apologize for what had happened between us. By that time, I was happily married and had just become a mother. Norman was gracious about it, and we remained amicable friends through social media. Our interactions were mostly limited to birthday wishes or occasional comments on posts. As time went by, Norman entered a relationship with a woman named Marissa. I was genuinely happy to see him moving on, even though my own marriage didn't work out. I focused on raising my daughter independently and finding contentment in my life. However, things took an unexpected turn during one Christmas when I found an old Polaroid picture of Norman and me together outside a cabin from our dating days. I messaged him about it, recalling the fun we had back then. Unfortunately, he never replied, and I later discovered that I was no longer on his friends list. Months later, Marissa reached out to me with a message filled with insults. She had seen the message I sent Norman months ago and demanded that I never contact him again. She boasted about how the charm bracelet he had given me paled in comparison to what he bought her. According to her, the promise rings we exchanged were meaningless, as he had given her a beautiful gold engagement ring with several diamonds. I chose not to respond to her outrageous claims. Frustrated and upset, I decided to leave Facebook and create an entirely new profile, adding only close friends and family. However, the harassment continued. I started receiving friend requests from unknown people, which I suspected were from Marissa. The first account I accidentally added began sending abusive messages, hurling insults and predicting that I would never find true love. I became wary and stopped adding anyone I didn't personally know. It perplexed me how she kept finding my new accounts. She attempted to connect with me on Instagram, Twitter, and even somehow discovered my phone number. When Snapchat became popular, I received a request from a user who had taken on the name of one of my Facebook friends, but their profile had eerie, cursive horror writing on paper. I maintained my stance of blocking and avoiding contact because I felt powerless in the situation. This year, I joined a dating app and met a guy named Nate within the first week. He seemed average-looking in his photos, so I didn't think much of it. Nate claimed he couldn't FaceTime because he had an Android phone, but we could talk on the phone. During our text conversations over the next few weeks, everything seemed to be going well, so I agreed to a meetup. We decided on an outdoor cafe, as I was cautious about having him show up at my house without knowing him personally. I was thrilled since it had been a long time since I went on a date. To my utter confusion, when I arrived at the cafe, I noticed a woman smiling and approaching me. It was Marissa. She sat down with a smug look on her face and greeted me with, "Hey babe." She confessed that she had been masquerading as Nate the whole time. At that point, I was at a loss for words. I couldn't understand what I had done to provoke such reactions from her, or why she had invested so much time in tormenting me. Marissa proceeded to explain that nearly 6 years ago, when she and Norman got together, he had shared details about his first relationship with her. She found me on his friends list and went through all my pictures and posts, trying to understand what he saw in me. When I messaged him, she confronted him, demanding to know why I had pictures of us together and why he still had me on Facebook. That's when he unfriended me and promised Marissa that he would cut off all contact. She admitted to hating me, claiming that I enjoyed playing with people's emotions and that she wanted to give me a taste of my own medicine. Marissa confessed that she had created multiple fake accounts to monitor me, ensuring that I wouldn't be in the same city as her and Norman. Despite living outside their city, she would visit places I mentioned I'd be at, making sure Norman wouldn't meet up with me. She even discovered where I worked through LinkedIn. Furthermore, She recruited a friend to impersonate Nate during our phone conversations. The most disturbing part was her fixation on my daughter. She believed my daughter shared similarities with Norman and became obsessed with the idea that I had secretly given birth to his child. Marissa warned me not to think about revealing this to Norman as a way to rekindle our relationship, claiming she would be the only one to have his baby. I was beyond horrified. I simply got up from the table and told her to never contact me again. I sat in my car in silence for a while, trying to process what had just happened. The first thing I did was call my daughter's school and alert the front desk about the possibility of someone other than me or her father attempting to pick her up. Next, I called my brother and shared the entire ordeal with him. He urged me to involve the police, but unfortunately, they couldn't offer much assistance without documented proof of Marissa's actions. It has been 2 months since then, and I haven't heard anything from her. My brother believes she achieved her goal of asserting herself as Norman's one and only, so she might leave me alone. Nevertheless, I still struggle with intense paranoia regarding what I post on social media and where she might be lurking next. I informed my family and close friends about the situation and warned them not to accept friend requests from unfamiliar profiles. Additionally, I showed my neighbors a picture of Marissa so they could notify the police if they spotted her near my house. I wouldn't put it past her to know my address and invade our privacy by peeping through the windows. As a precautionary measure, I changed all the locks in my house.